I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. It was Thursday, late afternoon, and I had ducked into the little corner coffee shop near my apartment. I usually came here when I didn't want to be anywhere, just the hum of machines and the smell of oversteamed milk. I was halfway through scrolling my phone when she appeared, the way she always did, just slipping in like she belonged to the place. "Hamza," she said. No hesitation. Not a "hey, you," or a questioning glance. Just my name, soft but certain. She wore a pale scarf, the kind that always looked like it had stories in the folds. I smiled before thinking, "Hi, Sarah." My voice sounded flat even to me. She ordered her tea like she always did, the one with a dash of cinnamon. I noticed the slight tremor when she picked up her cup, fingers brushing the rim, like she wasn't used to being in a hurry. I tried to ignore the flutter in my chest and focused on my coffee. Black, unsweetened, no distractions. But I couldn't. Not when she laughed at something the barista said, just the corner of her lips, eyes sparkling for half a second before settling back into the world. "You've got the same thing?" she asked, nodding toward my drink. "Yeah," I said, fumbling with the lid. "Habit." She tilted her head, watching me. There was a silence that wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't easy either. I noticed her hand flick toward her scarf, smoothing it as if to remind herself she wasn't supposed to feel whatever it was that made her fingers jitter. We talked about the usual things, her garden, my classes, the latest book she was reading. The words were light, ordinary, but beneath them, there was a pulse I couldn't name. I found myself leaning a fraction closer, careful not to seem obvious. I always left my phone on the table, screen facing up, half expecting a message I'd never sent. Sometimes I imagined typing something and deleting it immediately. Tiny gestures. Unsigned confessions. She mentioned my mother in passing, the way friends do, and I watched her eyes drift, softening. There was a pause, just long enough for me to feel the weight of it, before she blinked and smiled again. "You still fold your napkins neatly," she said suddenly, nodding at the one in my hand. I laughed, a little embarrassed. Old habits die hard. Her smile lingered longer than it should have. I caught my eyes flicking to hers for just a moment too long, then looked away, pretending to examine the coffee stains on the table. There was a sound, a phone buzzing on the counter. She glanced at it, but didn't move. She just let it sit. I realized my own phone had lit up too. A notification I hadn't checked. "I, should get going soon," I said, voice breaking slightly in the quiet. She nodded, picking up her cup. "Of course." Her hands trembled a little, brushing her scarf again. Then she paused, just as if she was thinking about saying something. Something she wasn't sure I should hear. Every time you visit," she murmured, almost to herself, "my heart races." I froze. Half a laugh caught in my throat. Half a question. Words stuck behind my teeth. She didn't look at me, but I could feel it, the weight of her glance in the air between us. I swallowed, nodded, tried to smile. "I'll see you next week." She let the corner of her mouth lift, just slightly. "Next week." I walked out without looking back, heart thumping, but her words circled in my head like a restless bird. The little bell on the door chimed as it closed behind me, leaving me with the quiet ache of not knowing what had just happened and what it might mean. I saw her again a week later. Same cafe, same quiet corner. She waved me over, but this time her smile had a little hesitation at the edges, like she was measuring whether I belonged in that moment. We ordered our drinks, chai for her, black coffee for me, and sat across from each other, letting the hum of the shop fill the gaps between words. "You know," she said after a while, stirring her tea slowly, "I used to come here with my mother when I was about your age." Her voice was soft, almost trailing off. We'd sit by that window, watch people passing. I liked the way life kept moving outside while we were stuck in our little bubble. I nodded, unsure what to say. There was something in her tone, not sad exactly, just intimate in a way that shouldn't have existed between us. I don't usually talk about that," she added quickly, as if afraid she'd crossed a line. I wanted to say something, anything. Instead, I reached for my cup, warming my hands around it. "It's okay," I said. Simple. Too simple, maybe. There was a pause. The kind that stretches and bends, and suddenly everything in the cafe becomes part of the silence. The tick of the wall clock, the faint scrape of chairs, the scent of cinnamon and coffee swirling together. "You're different from other kids I know," she said, almost in a whisper. Not a compliment, exactly. More like an observation. I felt my stomach tighten. My mind wandered. What did she mean by different? Was it just the age, the familiarity, the way I remembered her from summers long ago? My chest ached quietly, a mix of longing and caution. I imagined her hand brushing against mine accidentally, the warmth of her palm against mine. I shook the thought away. It was forbidden, too easy to get tangled in. Her closeness felt like a risk I couldn't take, and yet, here I was, lingering on her words. "I can help you with that," I said finally, pointing at her tote bag, overstuffed with books. It was such a trivial thing, yet I wanted to reach, to be near, to have a reason to touch something of hers. She smiled, just a flicker, and shifted the bag toward me. "Thanks. I don't usually let anyone do that," she said. And then, as if to underline the quiet, impossible intimacy of it all, she let her hand brush mine briefly as I handed the bag back. It was fleeting, almost accidental, but I caught the warmth in my chest and the little flutter in my stomach. I caught her gaze, and she didn't look away immediately, just held it, long enough for me to notice the tiny smile at the corners of her lips. I didn't say anything. Didn't need to. Words would have ruined it. I left the cafe that afternoon with my coffee gone cold, my head buzzing with thoughts I shouldn't have entertained. And yet, her gaze lingered in my mind long after, sharper than any conversation. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I saw her again on a Friday, the city wet from an afternoon drizzle. The cafe smelled like damp coats and coffee, and I slipped in just behind her, hoping she wouldn't notice. Of course she did. "Hamza," she said, voice quieter than usual. Not a greeting exactly, more like an acknowledgement. She adjusted her scarf, twisting it just so, as if hiding something she didn't want me to see. I sat across from her, hands wrapped around my coffee cup. The warmth didn't reach my chest. She didn't smile right away, just looked at me, really looked, and I felt the tension tighten around my ribs. "You've been busy?" she asked. "Yeah, classes." My answer sounded small, unconvincing. I wanted to ask about her, about everything, but the words jammed somewhere behind my teeth. She stirred her tea slowly, her spoon scraping the cup. "I didn't think I'd see you today." Her eyes flicked to the window, then back. I didn't expect it." I nodded, leaning back a fraction. "I wanted to. I don't know, get out of the rain." We sat in silence, letting the cafe noises fill the space. And yet, the silence wasn't empty. It was thick, almost pressing. I noticed her hands trembled slightly when she picked up the cup. There was a new tension today, like we both knew something had shifted. The air between us seemed fragile, and I caught myself imagining her leaning in, close enough for our breaths to mix. My throat tightened. I couldn't look at her, and yet I couldn't look away. A friend of hers walked in, calling her name. She stiffened, smiled politely, and the moment broke. I felt the pull of disappointment in my chest, the unspoken words choking me. I kept my hands wrapped around the cup, pretending to inspect a coffee stain on the table. After her friend left, she exhaled and leaned slightly closer. Her voice was low. Sometimes I wonder what you think of me." I froze. My fingers fidgeted with the napkin. I wanted to tell her everything, that I'd been thinking about her since last week, that my heart did a small, foolish jump every time she remembered my name, but I couldn't. Instead, I murmured, I don't know." She tilted her head, studying me, as if weighing my hesitation. Then she reached for the sugar jar. Her hand brushed mine. Too quick to be accidental, but not long enough to be intentional. I swallowed. Heat rose to my neck. My heartbeat filled the tiny space around us. I imagined her leaning closer, imagined the faint smell of her tea mixing with her scarf. My hand twitched, almost reaching. Then she paused. Our faces were inches apart, breaths mingling, yet she pulled back, just enough to leave the moment hanging. Her eyes didn't leave mine, though. They held a question I wasn't ready to answer. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words failed. We sat like that for a few seconds longer, suspended in the almost, the could have been. And then she looked down, twisting the spoon between her fingers, and the tension folded into quiet. I left with my coffee half drunk, the drizzle outside matching the way my thoughts swirled. That near brush, that almost confession, clung to me, quiet and sharp. It was late evening when I found her sitting on the small park bench near the corner of my street. The sun had dipped low, the lamplight casting long shadows on the pavement, and the air smelled faintly of wet leaves. She had her coat loosely draped over her shoulders, hands clasped around a coffee cup, as if holding on to something steady. I hesitated before sitting beside her, careful to leave space. She didn't move, just glanced at me sideways, a small, knowing smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're late," she said softly. "Traffic," I mumbled. My hands were cold, resting on my knees. I kept watching the way her fingers traced the rim of the cup, not meeting my gaze. There was a pause, long enough that I imagined walking away would be less complicated. But I didn't. I stayed. "I saw someone today," she said finally. Her voice trembled just a little, not from the cold. "At work. They asked me about you." I tried to keep my expression neutral, but my stomach clenched. "And," she shifted, turning slightly toward me. It made me realize something. Her hands twisted the cup, the porcelain clicking against itself. "I don't like feeling replaced. Or like you're slipping away." I swallowed hard. I wanted to tell her everything, that I'd been thinking about her constantly, that the almost touch from last week hadn't left me. But words tangled in my throat. Instead, I said, I don't know what to say." She let out a soft laugh, humorless, just shaking her head. "You don't have to say anything." But her eyes were sharp, searching, almost accusing. "I just can't pretend I don't notice. You make it too easy to care." I wanted to lean in. I wanted to close the small gap between us, to let her see what I'd been hiding behind polite smiles and careful words. But something in me held back. The age, the history, the quiet line we weren't supposed to cross. We sat there, quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant sound of cars. I felt her glance flick toward me, lingering longer than necessary, as if waiting for a signal. I wanted to give it. I wanted to, but I couldn't. She started, then stopped, twisting the lid of her cup. Her voice dropped, almost inaudible. "I think about things I shouldn't." I kept my hands folded, my body tense. My mind raced with imagined confessions, imagined closeness, and yet the moment hung, fragile, like glass balancing on a ledge. The street lamps flickered. A car passed slowly, its headlights cutting across her face, illuminating the faint tremor in her lips. She looked away, exhaling softly, letting the quiet stretch. I wanted to ask her, to break the silence with truth, with something real. My chest ached with the weight of what we weren't saying. And then she turned toward me again, eyes searching, voice barely above a whisper. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like if we didn't hold back?" I didn't see her for a week, or maybe two. I stopped counting after the third day. The cafe felt emptier without her presence, even though I tried to convince myself the hum of machines was enough. When I finally did call, she didn't pick up. Her voicemail was polite, clipped. "Can't talk right now. Call later." I left a message, my words stumbling, hesitant, erased half of what I'd said before pressing send. A few days passed. I hovered over my phone, thumb hovering, waiting for a reply I wasn't sure I wanted. Then, out of nowhere, she showed up at the park bench, but different, guarded, distant. Her scarf more tightly wrapped, her coat pulled closer. The warmth I'd glimpsed before was gone, replaced by a quiet caution that cut sharper than any argument. I've been busy," she said when I approached, voice flat. "Work errands." She kept her gaze ahead, not meeting mine. I nodded, trying to fill the silence with something small, meaningless. "Yeah, same here." There was a pause. I wanted to ask her why she'd pulled away, to demand the words she hadn't said, but instead, I watched her fidget with her cup, twisting the handle again and again. Something she wasn't telling me. I could feel it. You haven't called," I said finally, more statement than question. My voice cracked slightly. Her hand stilled. She glanced at me, and I caught the briefest flicker of something, guilt, fear, before she looked away. I needed space. Space. The word lingered in the air between us, heavier than the rain-slicked leaves. I tried to imagine what that meant. Was it a warning? A wall? Or a pause? My chest tightened at the ambiguity. I wanted to reach for her hand, to anchor myself in the certainty of her presence, but she leaned back slightly, subtly out of reach. Later that night, I opened my messages. There was a draft I hadn't sent, one I'd written 2 days earlier, words I'd never had the courage to press send. I miss you. I don't know what this is, but I need to see you. I read it again, read it a third time, and deleted it. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. The next afternoon, I passed the cafe, half expecting to see her there, but the seat by the window was empty. The barista didn't recognize me, or maybe didn't care. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the warmth fade while my thoughts circled around her absence. I imagined her, somewhere nearby, thinking of me too, or not. I imagined her phone lighting up, my name appearing on the screen, and her hesitation before ignoring it. And I thought of the draft I'd deleted, the words that might have changed everything, but hadn't. The bench we'd shared in the park remained empty in my mind. A phantom space. I walked past it, careful not to look, and yet I did, every step a quiet reminder of the pause we'd left between us. Life was moving. People were moving. And yet, somehow we weren't. Question hung in the night, unanswered, fragile, almost forbidden. I didn't see her for a week. Or maybe 2. I stopped counting after the 3rd day. The cafe felt emptier without her presence, even though I tried to convince myself the hum of machines was enough. When I finally did call, she didn't pick up. Her voicemail was polite, clipped. Can't talk right now. Call later. I left a message, my words stumbling, hesitant, erased half of what I'd said before pressing send. A few days passed. I hovered over my phone, thumb hovering, waiting for a reply I wasn't sure I wanted. Then, out of nowhere, she showed up at the park bench, but different, guarded, distant. Her scarf more tightly wrapped, her coat pulled closer. The warmth I'd glimpsed before was gone, replaced by a quiet caution that cut sharper than any argument. I've been busy, she said when I approached, voice flat. Work errands. She kept her gaze ahead, not meeting mine. I nodded, trying to fill the silence with something small, meaningless. Yeah, same here. There was a pause. I wanted to ask her why she'd pulled away, to demand the words she hadn't said, but instead, I watched her fidget with her cup, twisting the handle again and again. Something she wasn't telling me. I could feel it. You haven't called, I said finally, more statement than question. My voice cracked slightly. Her hand stilled. She glanced at me, and I caught the briefest flicker of something, guilt, fear, before she looked away. I needed space. Space. The word lingered in the air between us, heavier than the rain-slicked leaves. I tried to imagine what that meant. Was it a warning? A wall? Or a pause? My chest tightened at the ambiguity. I wanted to reach for her hand, to anchor myself in the certainty of her presence, but she leaned back slightly, subtly out of reach. Later that night, I opened my messages. There was a draft I hadn't sent, one I'd written 2 days earlier, words I'd never had the courage to press send. I miss you. I don't know what this is, but I need to see you. I read it again, read it a 3rd time, and deleted it. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. The next afternoon, I passed the cafe, half expecting to see her there, but the seat by the window was empty. The barista didn't recognize me, or maybe didn't care. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the warmth fade while my thoughts circled around her absence. I imagined her, somewhere nearby, thinking of me too, or not. I imagined her phone lighting up, my name appearing on the screen, and her hesitation before ignoring it. And I thought of the draft I'd deleted, the words that might have changed everything, but hadn't. The bench we'd shared in the park remained empty in my mind. A phantom space. I walked past it, careful not to look, and yet I did, every step a quiet reminder of the pause we'd left between us. Life was moving. People were moving. And yet, somehow we weren't. The next evening, I found her in her kitchen. The small apartment smelled faintly of jasmine tea and something baking, a domestic calm I wasn't used to seeing her in. She was stirring a pot on the stove, hands careful, movements deliberate, and I realized how ordinary she looked, and how impossible it was to separate that ordinariness from the pull she had on me. I lingered in the doorway, unsure if I should step in or leave. "You came," she said without turning, voice low, steady. "I wanted to," I said. My words sounded small, even to me. There was a pause, the kind where the ticking of the clock seems louder than it should. I wanted to ask her everything, to confess weeks of unspoken thoughts, but I stayed quiet, letting the weight of my presence speak first. "I wasn't sure," she murmured, finally looking at me. Her eyes searched mine, hesitant, questioning, and I realized she'd been holding back, afraid of what she might feel, and afraid of what I might. I swallowed. "Neither was I admitted softly. "But I can't stop thinking about it. About us. About this." My hands twitched, wanting to reach, wanting to anchor myself in her presence. She moved closer, setting the spoon down and folding her hands loosely in front of her. "I keep wondering if it's worth it, if we're making a mistake." I studied her, trying to read the honesty in her eyes, the careful tremor in her fingers. "I don't know," I said quietly, "but I know I care. And that's enough for now." Her lips curved just slightly. No words, no promises, just acknowledgement. I wanted to lean in, to close the distance, to say the words that had been looping in my head for weeks. But instead, I let my hand hover near hers, stopping just short. She noticed. Her fingers twitched, brushing mine ever so slightly. A silent agreement. A quiet yes, without needing to say it aloud. We stayed like that for a while, the faint clatter of pots, the ticking clock, the soft hum of life around us. Ordinary things, quietly grounding. I realized the risk wasn't in saying something dramatic, but in letting myself be seen, letting her see me completely, and letting that possibility linger without breaking the fragile calm. Finally, she gave a soft exhale and a small nod. "Okay." I mirrored her. "Okay," I whispered back. No grand gestures, no declarations. Just that moment, shared breath, the brush of hands, a smile that lingered because it was honest. And in that small kitchen, with nothing more than our quiet acknowledgement, I felt something settle. Something like understanding. Something like hope, tempered by weeks past, almost unnoticed. The cafe became routine again, though not in the same way. I still ordered black coffee. She still took her chai with a dash of cinnamon. But now, the tiny pauses between us carried warmth instead of tension. We met at the park bench again, the one by the corner where rain had once soaked our shoes and left the leaves glossy. She arrived first this time, scarf loosely draped, coat slightly open, fingers tracing the rim of her cup like she'd always done. I sat down across from her, the familiar scrape of the bench under my palms grounding me. "Morning," she said quietly. No theatrics, no hesitation, just the soft certainty I'd been craving. "Morning," I replied, and for the first time, the word didn't feel heavy. We didn't speak much, didn't need to. There was the hum of the city waking, a faint breeze moving through the trees, the occasional chirp of a bird that reminded me she'd told me about her mornings spent in this park as a girl. I noticed the same slight tremor in her fingers, but now it felt like a shared rhythm rather than an unspoken warning. One morning, she brought a thermos of her tea and shared it with me. We sat quietly, sipping, hands brushing occasionally, laughter small and dry when one of us almost spilled. It was ordinary, perfectly ordinary. I thought about the weeks before, about the drafts I hadn't sent, the pauses that had stretched like thin wire between us. And I realized how fragile and real this closeness was, earned in silence, patience, and small gestures rather than declarations or grand promises. One afternoon, at exactly 8:47 a.m., I arrived at the cafe a little earlier. She was already there, notebook open, pen poised. I slid into the seat beside her. She looked up, eyes soft, and for a moment, the world shrank to that one corner of the room, the hum of the espresso machine, the faint smell of cinnamon tea. "I brought your coffee," she said, passing it over with a slight smile. I nodded, grateful. Thanks. No words beyond that. Just the quiet comfort of presence. We read, wrote, and drank. Occasionally our hands brushed. Sometimes they stayed close enough to feel warmth without needing to hold. That was enough. That had always been enough. Years from now, I imagined, we might still find ourselves at this same bench, same cafe, same ordinary moments. Nothing dramatic. No declarations. Just the quiet acknowledgement that we had found something worth keeping. And as I watched her stir her tea one evening, sun fading behind the rooftops, I realized it was the small, persistent details, the black coffee I still drank, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup, our early mornings, the bench by the park, that held the truth. Not words, not confessions, just recognition shared in silence. I smiled softly, and she met it with the same quiet certainty. It was enough. The world went on, but somehow, so did we.